Welcome to One Book, readers discussing one book in their lives. I'm James Bubar. This evening, well, afternoon in New York City, evening in Izmir, we're
Right.
discussing Kahlil Gibran's The Prophet. Published in 1923, The Prophet has been translated into 100 languages, making it one of the most translated books in history and has never been out of print. Thank you, Kwasi, Gyasi, for taking a few minutes out of your pandemic time in New York City to talk about this book. I really appreciate seeing you and you joining me for a few minutes.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. I'm really I'm pleased to do this. The book has given me a lot of wisdom over the years, and now is a time where I think we're all starving for some wise perspective. So
Yeah.
it's a good time to have the chat.
Yeah, we're all not only reading but rereading, whether it's books or
Right.
rereading our lives or our daily routines,
Right.
our choices. It's pretty amazing. But I want to just start a little with I think it was about 11 years ago now that me and a very good friend of mine who's a professor and Jay for also from my Uber life, we would gather in the 20x lobby working throughout the summer, and
Right.
I think at that point you had just come across the Prophet. I think you had read it. I'm sorry if I'm remembering it wrong, but you were the person who would remember when we did the calls to work. It wasn't work in a negative sense, but we would do a reading for the day. And
Right.
often you kept returning to the Prophet. And so that's at least 11 years ago. So maybe start about how you encountered it, what you took from it then, and now what's remained, or have new things come from the book? Has been multiple rereadings. That seems like a good entry point uh, into the discussion.
Right. Right. Um, like many things that have significant meaning in my life today, I don't always remember the explicit details of how I came to find the book or how it crossed my path. It's like I have a lot of good friends where the closer you are, the more I don't remember exactly how we became friends or what that instance was.
Sure.
So the book was very much the same way. It just, for all intents and purposes, magically appeared in my life.
It's perfect.
I'm just going with that. Like it was one of those things that just happened to present itself in my life. I don't remember the circumstances. Um, but at the time when I read it, it's one of the few books that I read because, well, first off, to know about me, you got to know the type of books that I read. So I don't typically read fiction books. I don't typically read books that are poetic or have any form of poetry in them. I usually read very technical or business, how to,
Mm-hmm.
self-help, solve a problem kind of book.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came across this book, there was probably an initial, and then this is me trying to remember, an initial knee-jerk reaction to dismiss it because one, it was very small, and two, just upon a quick scan of it, there seemed to be a lot of what I maybe at that time would have considered like poetic fluff.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, for where I am right now, I'm trying to build a business. I need hardcore, tangible, concrete solutions to problems, questions I have. And that was probably my initial spirit to it. But um, I'm lucky in that something caused me to spend more time with it, read
Mm-hmm.
it through full. Um, and what I got from it was probably the most beautiful way to address the most important aspects of life in a very wise and often beautifully said way. And I don't know how else to describe it as that. It's both wise and just beautiful. It's
Yeah.
nice to say what is written in the book, say it out loud because it's this old English style, and it very much sounds like how you would think poetry is supposed to sound. But when you really, really listen and clue in to what's being said, you're like, this feels biblical. It feels like it has been given to you from the heavens,
Yeah.
and it's stuff that everyone should know, right?
Yeah.
To answer your point about what I got from the book then versus now, I think at that time I was in a different space. I think I was in a relationship or maybe just out of something. I was focused on work, and I was just in an more intellectually curious place than I think I am now, per se. So I was really keen on the parts about love, marriage, more the humanity stuff, friendship, pain, just these concepts. Like I think parenting came up. It was the entire book that I digested, but I would say the parts that I returned to were work, which you mentioned, were pain, because it was the first time I'd ever heard anybody discuss pain in that way.
Yep. Pain
Love.
Pain is the cracking of the shell of understanding.
Yes. It's the bitter potion that we all must take, that the inner physician gives us.
Yes.
So the way it was said to me, it just struck a chord. Love was the same thing. It really described the arc of what that feels like, which is a difficult topic to explain in general, but it really showed the beauty of the light and the dark side of what love really is, and that you can't escape the dark side if you really want the fullness of what love is supposed to offer you. That, I think, was the most critical part about that. The work part was very important because I think as a society, we have this love and hate relationship with work, in that, when we feel like we're working too much or we're close to burnout, we feel like we never want to work again, or we just want to completely zone out. But then you feel when you're not doing work or you're not engaged in some kind of challenging activity, there is some kind of lethargy that sets in, this kind of melancholy emptiness that you feel like you're just listless in the sea of life. This book really helped me understand the framing for how to look at that. And I thought that was really good. So that's where I was then.
Before we move on, can I stop you right now? Because I just want to jump on a couple things. One of the things you said that was so interesting is when I first came across the book, it was in the New Age section of the bookstore I was working in, like God knows how many decades ago. And then, of course, after I read it, I'm like, this is literature. It's not. And so it kind of, there's a long tradition in America of self-help books providing answers, as you mentioned. Some may be business, some may be, how to network or build relationships. But with the Prophet, it always seems like it's not about giving answers, but it's about framing yourself to question or think about things differently, even though it kind of looks on the surface as a kind of new age type self-help book, even though it's got almost 100 years old now. So it's not about information, is it? It's more about experiencing the beauty of the language, the ideas in this powerful setting that makes you not be able to get to the bottom of them. And some of these books, some of these self-help books you read, you're like, okay, I got that. I got to do these 8 things. But when I read, and when I read The Prophet, every time I read it, it's like I'm reading it for the first time. I was like, this was in here. This was sometimes, So it's a good. It's
100% the case.
And I'm like, it's a good marker in your life because at certain periods, and this is what we'll get to because I want to move forward with what you said, but it seems like it's reading you back in a way that if you notice it at this time, that's kind of what you need to work on. But the next time you read it, something else will come across. It's really, really profound. But I just wanted to throw that out there. And I think about the beauty of the language. He spent 4 years writing this book, and it's not that long. You can read it in an hour and a half, I think. But 4 years over every word. But I just wanted to throw that in there before we moved into your kind of reading now. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, to answer what you were saying, I think that 4 years, you can really sense that as you're reading it, that there was a lot of iteration that went into the architecture and the distillation of thought into a way that both feels wise and beautiful, right? Those two dominant feelings that you get when you read this book. One other thing that I wanted to say that came to mind that's actually in the book about what the book actually does for you is in the section where he speaks about teaching and the purpose of teaching. There is a point where he says it's not really about trying to, put anything in your head. Kind of like the purpose of teaching should be to bring you to the threshold of your own mind.
Right.
And kind of falls in line with the literal root meaning of education, which is based upon educing, drawing out instead of putting in.
Yeah.
And this book is really good at doing that. It doesn't feel like it's telling you the answer, but it makes you question how you live your life and how circumstances have unfolded in your life to find your own answer or find your own sense in all of it.
Wow.
And that's a really good way of describing how this book helps you. And every time you read it, to your point, you truly do discover some part that you can't believe is actually in there. Because you're like, how did I miss that?
Exactly. And it's only an hour and a half long. And you're like, because I don't think we've ever talked about the teaching part until today. And God knows, we could just spend hours just quoting it to each other, but that teacher section probably wouldn't have come up years ago.
Nope.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Not at all. Yeah. So I think now, and I think I mentioned this to you before, but with where the world is at and the conversations that are being had, conversations about the nature of freedom, liberty, what is justice, what is fair crime and punishment, what is law and the nature of law, where does that fit into living a peaceful and fulfilled life? These kind of questions are definitely more in my foreground than they were 10 or 11 years ago. And as a result, my brain is now primed to look for things that speak to that conversation. And I think when I was reading the book over or rereading new sections of the book, those parts immediately jumped at me in a way that I was unaware that they were even in the book to begin with. I didn't even remember that there was a section on freedom or that there was a section on laws. I completely forgot, even though I have highlights on those sections.
That's so true. That's so true. My copies of The Prophet have like different pen colors, highlights, checks. But then when I'm reading it, it's like I'm encountering it for the first time.
Yeah. So I think those are the parts that jumped out at me more. The more recent times that I've looked at the book. There are other parts that always stay with me. They will always be there. Like the reason and passion, the work part, the love part, the marriage part. These are things that there's like particular parts of each of those sections that are just part of my DNA now. They're literally reflected in my cellular structure at this point. But there's a ton more in that book that I have yet to discover, which is amazing. When you see the size of the book, you're like, how is that actually possible?
And you've not only read it multiple times, but it's also the kind of book where you'll flip through occasionally, like just look up, or if you have it around the house. But I don't want to put you on the spot, but this happened to me. I didn't know. It's stupid to say you didn't know. So it's more accurate to say you forgot, or you didn't. I didn't pay enough attention, or I didn't retain it. But there was a section on the house. I've read this book. I've taught this book, and I'm reading it today. But somehow all my attention goes into this thing of this writing about the house when they speak to us of houses, and the gathering crowd around him, and when he says, "What is in your house? Have you peace? Have you remembrance? Have you beauty?" And here now, I'm very happy I'm in Izmir, but like most people in the world, we're spending a lot of times in our house, right?
Yeah,
And I'm
that's
thinking
great.
about, I
You're right.
probably was always on the go before, especially in New
Yeah,
York, you know?
yeah.
And so, but now I'm literally, it stopped me crazy. It stopped me, and it was like, this is a temple, a house for remembrance, for beauty, and for peace. And wow, if that wasn't something that, not like a typical book that's supposed to give you the answers, but start you on a process of rethinking or reseeing your, or rereading your life now. It was
It's
amazing.
interesting you say that about that section as well, because I don't remember it, or slash I didn't pay enough attention to it, or
Or you
slash
were,
it wasn't relevant
or you
at the
were,
time.
right.
But but there are sections also in that book where I remember the section, but I don't remember, or I remember the text, but I didn't realize that it was actually in that section. So,
Oh, okay.
for instance, as soon as you said house, I remember I read something that is part of my cellular DNA structure now, but I don't know if it was in house or the section on pleasure, and it was about the dangers of too much comfort, and
Yes.
how comfort
Yes.
enters your home as a
Yes.
guest, and then soon becomes,
A
a master
master of
making
that.
puppets of your dreams. And
Okay.
I really like,
We
and
could
I
do a
always
whole
remember
talk. We could do a whole talk on that sentence. It's so
just
beautiful.
in
It's
that
so
sentence
powerful.
alone talks about so many different elements of what I believe many people struggle with without even realizing they're struggling with it. I think comfort in and of itself is a form of resistance, right?
Mm-hmm.
To quote Stephen Pressfield.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably the most insidious one, because on some level you need it to
Right.
decompress,
Yep.
and you need it to recharge and replenish so that you can get back to the work. But if you indulge in it too much, it really does make puppets of your dreams, in that it short circuits it.
Yep.
You start to lose some of that oomph that is behind the drive to get out what you need to get out, or do what you need to do.
Yeah.
So you can't be too comfortable.
Yeah.
It's this
Yeah.
weird dichotomy, this weird balance that you have to have. Like, you
Yeah.
need it, but you can't have too much of it, or it'll undercut your drive.
It's in it is in the house section, and
It is now. Okay.
I think, but of course, who knows. But there's also a similar sentiment in the house where he talks about, um, you shouldn't turn your house into a you shouldn't dwell in a tomb made by the dead, but for the living. Dwell in something for the living, not a tomb for the dead. Or that your house is a mast and not an anchor.
Oh,
And
yeah.
just that
That's a
sentence, and it makes you
that's
like
a good
it
one.
makes you re-see everything. And my eyes have gone across that sentence, I mean, 20 times probably. But it's that weird ability for the
That's
book to read you back now, because now we're obviously thinking more of home in positive, negative ways. We're safe, but we're also missing so many things. But I haven't encountered another book that does that on such a consistent basis, where they're not long sentences, but beautifully crafted in a short text that just hits you new, no matter how many times you've read it. Even some of the sections that I remember, like you still enjoy encountering them almost for the first time again. And then there's other parts where it's as if you just missed them the first time.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But you were going to mention, so you were talking about how it affected now, and I want how your reading of it has shifted now based on the sections in terms of where you are in your life. But one of the things I wanted to ask you is, do you think some of this magic that he creates in the book is because of the setting or because of the context of the story? So, in other words, if he would have just sat down and said all this stuff about house and love and freedom, would we have the same conversation? Or is it because it's this prophet who's about to depart? I don't want to give away the ending, but he's about to depart, and people from the community gather. And he talks about, so it's in this dialogue setting where as a reader,
Right.
you're almost participating in that moment constantly, where he's on the shore getting ready to depart at the end of his time there. And so it's that extra layer that seems to draw it in as a continuous dialogue, as
Right.
opposed to being more flat, where he would say, these are things about a house or these are things about love. It's this kind of engagement through dialogue that makes rereading it just as powerful. I don't know if you
Right.
had the similar thoughts
I
about it.
didn't. It's an interesting lens to put on it. I never thought about it in that way, but I can say that each time I pick up the book and I'm aware of the context of him leaving and the people coming and they're like, speak to us of this.
Yeah.
It definitely evokes visualization. It evokes the image of mass amounts of people gathering around someone who is offering his last bit of wisdom before he departs. And there's something that makes what he says have more weight because of that image of him leaving and giving people as much as he could give of himself in that moment. So there's this kind of, I'm trying to find the word, but it's not that it's finite, but there's this, it's like the last couple drops of something that you're drinking, the thirst for wisdom, the last couple drops, they're like that much more enjoyable, or that they're savored more because they're the last of it.
And it's almost like the book exists in an eternal present. So whenever you enter it, if you enter it at the beginning or you enter it in one of the chapters, it's a dialogue that's constantly kind of just happening. Where, because of the setting and the characterization.
I never thought about it in that way, that no matter where you jump into it, you're thinking about it as a dialogue that's continuously happening. You're just jumping in. But I can say that the bigness of it, the epicness of how he sets up the story has an effect on the way that even the words sound in my head as I'm reading it.
Right.
And the image of the picture that he painted with those words and with the setting has an effect on my interpretation of it. It definitely has an effect. It's not present in how I process it.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Right. And it's also not information. But I wrote down another line just for you, because you may remember this, but it's, again, something that seemed to jump to me. But he talks about man, meaning humankind, can be a shapeless pygmy that walks asleep in the mist, searching for its own awakening.
Yeah. That's a heavy one.
And you just
stop. I remember there's a couple parts where he mentions, I think, the pygmy phraseology, but there was one, I think, that was about law. I think it was either law or crime and punishment that spoke to me in a different way this time when I read it.
Interesting.
Because it mirrored other things that I had read since I first read this book that I considered wise. You know, when you read something and you just know it's a truth, right? And he even says this in the book. He's like, don't try to think of something as the truth. Think of it as a truth. And there's certain things that you come across that you know in that moment it's a truth. I think it was the self-knowledge or self-teaching part of the book where he said that there's certain things that it was already lying dormant in you in terms of the understanding. And when you see it, it's as though it awakened the other half of it that was dormant within you. So now you fully understand what was probably already there to begin with. The words that you just read just completed the algorithm. And that pygmy part was I think mentioned in the sections on law and crime and punishment that connected to stuff that I had read that I thought was wise about the nature of crime and the nature of law, which is, you know, we can't think about these things in too much of a good versus bad, good versus evil, this kind of binary perception of circumstances, because everything is kind of interconnected. The good, someone who is good has in their underbelly something that would be considered bad, and no one can have this kind of moral high ground completely. So it was this whole like play on light and dark and shadow and your pygmy self that really made me understand that wisdom from a completely different lens. But he said it in such a way that, again, it's beautifully said, but it's said in a way that makes you understand it for yourself without you just regurgitating someone else's words. It's like, no, this is a human thing that I can understand because I'm human. That's how the framing always hits you. It's not like, here are my tenets, you must learn my tenets, and as soon as you learn it, you become wise. It's more like, you are already wise, you just have to perceive your life from this lens and this angle, and here's your wisdom.
That book, it just came to mind, the lotus flower, that Buddhist image of the lotus flower constantly opening. You know, it never ends. There's new petals. Just came to my mind about reading this book. But even at the end, when he's about to leave and they're talking about the conversation, even at that point, he says, "Was it I who spoke?" You know, he says to the people after they've said, "Thank you for sharing all these words," and he says, Was it I who spoke? Was I also not a listener?" And it makes you think, like, it just makes you stop and think, okay, he was listening to the people asking questions, of course, but then over all of his time in the town, he was listening to their, you know, getting to know them, and that larger sense of listening. As we think about our community members and their pains or their fears or their doubts. But then it was also, something was also speaking through him, which gets to this notion of this deep wisdom that he's almost channeling. And then you could argue that Kahlil Gibran got in touch with that same place.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Source, man.
Yeah. The source. Do you find yourself recommending it a lot? Do you find a lot of your what are your reactions when people, especially now, because you've been at home in the book for years. So do you come across people who haven't read it, and what are their reactions?
A ton of people who haven't read it. I think this is probably one of the most recommended books that I give in terms of someone asking me for a good book. I always bring this up, you know, in my top 3, just right away. The thing about recommending books is there's 2 components to it. So one is you also want to recommend something to some degree that you know someone will read.
They'll finish. Like, they'll finish it.
Crack it open, right? You know, it's not so daunting that
it's not.
See it.
It's not War and Peace. That's like 700 days.
It's not like this hefty tome that scares you off before you even start. It seems inviting, and I think because it's poetic and because it, you know, if you get an edition that has, you know, imagery in it, it's interesting to thumb through. But if you read even one word, you're pulled in. So regardless, you know, if you give this to someone, they will have read at least one section or at least read several paragraphs. And, you know, depending on their level of experience in life, I think they'll get something from it. You know, I wouldn't give this book, let's say, to a young child, but if you give this to an adult, I can't imagine any adult would pick this book up and not get something from it. So this is definitely one of the most gifted books that I have ever given out. And to your point, I think I'm surprised that a lot of people haven't read it. So as soon as I know that they haven't, my instinct is you must get it now. And to the point that I'm willing to get it for you
Yeah.
because I just feel that passionate about it just adding to your life in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So
I can
I
remember. I can remember going to the Strand, and you would find sometimes you find certain editions on
yeah,
sale, and I remember buying 4 or 5 because you just want to. You don't want to recommend it. You want to gift it. You want it
yeah,
to
you
be a
want to.
gift.
This is definitely this is the kind of book that you want to give. So if I had multiple copies, I would just be giving it out constantly. Like this would be one of those things that it would be like my calling card. But yeah, I think the people that I have given it to when I bring it back up,
Hmm.
um, like, oh, I love this part. They'll speak about one particular section in general. Like I spoke to a young woman not too long ago, and she said how much she loved the section on marriage. And I know anybody who has more of a romantic side to them, or is in a relationship currently, or broke up, or whatever the case is, that section is very, very impactful. It is one of the best ways that I think you could describe a romantic relationship, or the way that a romantic relationship should probably work. Again, you don't know for sure, but it's like the metaphors and the analogy, you start to get the point, and you're like, you know what, that actually does make sense.
Yeah.
That kind of feels true based on my experience.
Well, and
um,
it's like you've brought up a bunch of times about the imagery, and it's not only the beauty of the language, but the images stay with you. So in the sections
yeah,
on love or marriage, when it talks about the roof of a temple doesn't stand if the pillars are next to each other, it
yeah.
just it seems so simple, right?
Yeah,
But it's so powerful, like in this Zen way where you just stop and yeah, yeah.
yeah. It's to me, it's. I think the imagery is part of the reason why all those sections were able to stay within my DNA and my cells, because I think we're more visual creatures anyway. So
Mm-hmm.
anytime you can evoke an image in someone's mind, you have a stronger chance of having that information stick. And I think this book does a really good job of painting a picture, or providing the kind of metaphor or analogies that immediately cause you to imagine something,
Mm-hmm.
or to think of an image, and it sticks immediately. And I think that for me is probably why I keep returning to the book, because it's never a negative image. It's always something positive, something, light, uplifting. I never read that book and feel darkness. I never read that book and feel heavy. So even particularly just to kind of, connect it to the state of the world right now, it's the perfect kind of book to read, because it is both wise and offers a sense of prudence, but it doesn't offer hopelessness.
Right.
It offers, some kind of light, and it offers some kind of perspective that gives you a sense of optimism naturally, without forcing it on you. It
Yeah.
just kind of naturally happens. Like, maybe it isn't so bad, or maybe I was being a little too tough on myself, or what, I should just
Yeah.
rethink how I'm processing this situation. That to me is one of the most powerful things any book can give you, is a sense of optimism and hope
Yeah.
to continue forward. And I think this book definitely helps do that.
Well, that's a good place to end it. I'm just going to leave you with a couple of lines. One of the things that struck me, probably because I'm missing time in America right now, is usually when I'm in visiting family and visiting friends in New York City, and there's that incredible line about friendship where he says, I'm not quoting exactly, but he talks about you don't go to a friend's house to kill hours. You go to a friend's house to live hours. And
Yeah.
so this time, I want to thank you for this 35 minutes or so of life, of living 35 minutes. And then I'm going to leave you with a beautiful image, since you had brought us to that. Uh,
Yeah.
Gibran writes, beauty is eternity, gazing at itself in a mirror, but you are the eternity and you are the mirror. So that seems like a good place to leave for now.
Yeah,
But we
that's
know
a good
that
place to leave for now.
we know there will be a rereading, which means there'll
Yeah,
be a rereading of us, rereading the book, and then we'll have to have another conversation about that. But
for sure.
thank you so much for your time. It's a really exciting to have you launch this uh, one book part of A Lit Passage, and I really would thank you for your time. It's been incredible, and
Thank you
really,
for having
really,
me. Seriously, it's great, man.
as you said, very uplifting and encouraging.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I appreciate you thinking of me for this book in particular, and allowing me the opportunity to share what I got from it, and and just also catch up. But yeah, yeah. I think we'll have more of these because this book is one of those things that is constantly reinventing itself
Yeah,
within you.
yeah. Well said. So take care, be safe, and we hope to talk to you soon.
All right, cheers.